Serious, people who have survived a murder attempt, by dumb luck. What's your story? I was 14 and outside in my garage petting my cat. It was November, so it was already dark by 5 p.m. Someone opened the door behind me without me hearing, grabbed me by my ponytail and started dragging me outside. They hit me on my head with a brick and knocked me out. Pulled me halfway around my house when, I'm guessing this is when, they stabbed me on the left side of my stomach. This must have brought me out of my daze, because my mom said she heard me scream from inside where she and my brother and sister were in the kitchen. They came out the front door and saw me bleeding out on the sidewalk, called 911. Had 12 stitches, double layer, a severe concussion, and whiplash. Didn't eat and hardly slept for a week. They never found them. My sister had this one friend when we were growing up I always got a bad vibe from. She would try to pick on my little brother but I would always stop her. I was 8, she was 10. Once we were at a lake and all the kids were swimming. I swam out to the deep roped off part but I was still little and really shouldn't have. She kept acting weird and getting closer to me making this weird laugh. She pushed me off the wooden pole in the water and I got scared and started to swim back but she came up behind me and pushed me under the water. It didn't click at first that she was trying to drown me. But after she aggressively pushed me under the third time I had this crazy moment of clarity. It was like the world slowed down ever so briefly. I relaxed and let myself sink, swam underneath her, and came up behind her. I grabbed her hair and shoved her face into the water, keeping my legs on her back so her body couldn't rise. I waited until her struggling slowed down and let her come up. I waited in the water saying nothing, bracing myself for her retaliation but she just looked panicked and swam back to shore. I told my sister who had already expressed that the girl was weird. We confronted her together and she just looked really dazed. In a monotone voice she said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know it would be like that." It wasn't until I replayed those words in my mind later, that I realized what she was saying was, "Sorry I tried to drown you." It wasn't until I was almost drowned myself that I realized how horrible it is to do to someone. You might have taught her empathy that day with your self-defense tactic. You might have saved someone's future life and kept her out of prison. Serious, 3 men drugged me and kidnapped me. I woke up on a floor with one of them tearing my clothes off and my moon boot, broken foot. I tried kicking him off with the boot but he started knocking my head into the floor and I passed out. I woke up in daylight in a garbage bin, naked and in a pool of my own blood. I don't know how the hell I got out of there or how I found the nearest policeman but I then collapsed again. Woke up in a hospital with 52 stitches in my head and 78 in and around my vulva and breasts. Doctor said it was the worst rape trauma she ever saw. They say it's a miracle I'm alive and don't know how I did it. They were never caught. I am a crisis, trauma and PTSD counselor now. They didn't win. As a woman suffering with PTSD at the moment, the fact you have been through so much and made it out gives me immense hope that I can own my life again. I was exiting a bar once after last call and was with a friend who was a medic. We saw a girl laying in a snow bank near a telephone pole who had just been hit by a car. We ran over and tried to help her. Some others were already on the phone with 911 and I, not having any medical training, didn't have anything to contribute but didn't want to just leave. The whole situation was concerning. I turn around for a second and start to hear people screaming. I turn around, a minivan was heading for us, the few people around this woman. They already started to run, but I was too late. He hit me as I was trying to flee. Put the car in reverse, ran over me again, and then went forward and run over me a third time. Turns out the guy was high and drunk and got into a fight with the women's BF, whom I bared a strong resemblance to. He thought I was him. Not to throw a pity party for myself, but 9 years later I have a ton of medical issues, and my life pretty much started on a downward spiral since then. But sure, I guess I survived. Whatever happened to the driver, though? An off-duty cop watched the whole thing go down, and copied his license plate number. He was apprehended 20 minutes later and charged with attempted murder, along with many other things. He pleaded out to just 3 years in jail. I was riding in a train across Eastern Europe. I was running low on money, and even though I had been warned that a woman should not travel alone in second-class seating, I did not spring for first class. I was sitting alone in one of the compartments that seats 6. This was also a mistake and a very stupid one to sit alone. Eventually the train stopped and a man got on. He was very drunk. He came into my compartment and I guess thought I looked like his ex-wife. He attacked me. If it were not for the fact that this particular station was the border between two countries, I would be dead. Instead, border patrol from both countries were on the train, and while I was unable to scream, the door was open and at least a half a dozen uniformed men jumped him and saved me. I was in the hospital for a little while but recovered. At one point during the trial, one of the cops asked me if I wanted him and his buddies to hold the guy down while I hit him. I thought he was joking. So I said no, go ahead, you do it. I was also joking. But it turns out they took it seriously and were about to. I did put a stop to that at least. But they were so offended that someone from their country would attack a young female American tourist. They were furious with him. So many people there depended upon tourism. Well, my mom got mad at me when I was 20 and I didn't give her money for her birthday, which I'm assuming was to pay off drug dealers of hers, so she stabbed me between the ribs. Ended up getting stuck in the bone and had to get it taken out in surgery. I was out with a few friends, and with us was a girl that had just broken up with a psychopath. We didn't know he was a psychopath, we found out that night. We were just walking back home from a restaurant, it was about 1 a.m., and the guy came running out of nowhere. I don't know how he knew where and when to meet us. He ran to the girl, lifted her shirt up and stabbed her in the gut, literally splitting her belly open like a fish, and then ran off. This whole thing happened really quickly, so we were all in shock. The girl was holding her own intestines in her hands and she was so shocked that she didn't even seem scared, wasn't screaming or anything. She just stood there. We called an ambulance and they managed to somehow put everything back and sew her up. This happened about 3 years ago and she still has pretty serious problems with her digestive tract, can't eat certain things and that kind of stuff. That image of her just standing in the middle of the pathway holding her own guts will remain stuck in my head forever. The guy got 13 years in jail, by the way. Throwaway because it got some media. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I was representing this guy that had embezzled almost $500,000 from his business partner. He was looking down the barrel at several years in prison, a bunch of his assets had been seized by the government, was being sued by multiple creditors for north of $2 million, and was in the midst of an ugly divorce and wasn't allowed to see his kids. I was one of 3 lawyers he had, criminal, civil and divorce. He was drinking a lot and using coke. I used to get this incoherent phone calls in the middle of the night that ranged from threats to crying. He came to my office one day and asked for me, but I was in court. My secretary said he was perfectly civil. He then went to his divorce lawyer's office and shot him to death. Got stopped by the police a short distance away and was wounded in a shootout. He would later tell the cops that he had come to my office to shoot me that day and also planned to shoot his civil attorney. I, 18 female back then, now 25, was on my way home at night after meeting a friend. My home was just 10 minutes away from the train station. After a few minutes I felt someone following me. No big deal, I thought, just someone else walking home. But I started walking faster. I realized the person behind me was catching up, weird. In my head I started to make up scenarios of how to defend myself if the person would attack me. Never would I think of this to actually happen. Well, until I felt something on the back of my head, hitting me hard. I went furious. I turned around and attacked the guy. My mind was just full of anger towards this stranger who, what I thought, hit me. We were wrestling until I fell on the ground. He was sitting on top of me, strangling me. I tried to crawl my nails into his eyes as deep as I could, but I started to black out. Suddenly there was this thought in my head. Wake up, or you will die. Well, adrenaline kicked in again and I opened my eyes and screamed at the top of my lungs, attacking him again. That helped. He stood up and began to run. I laid there for a few seconds, then I started to run home, still screaming. My mom was already at our door and opened for me because my screams woke her up, or her mother's senses, who knows. She immediately called the cops and they could arrest him on the same night. It turned out that he actually shot me in my head from behind. They assumed that the gun didn't work properly, the bullet didn't penetrate my skull and stuck in there, but as far as I know they never found out why the gun misfired. I'm glad though. He told the cops that he already followed me a few times in the past, but never had the guts to do it. He wanted to kill me and rape my dead body. I know that's a wild story, I have some Swiss newspaper articles as a source if someone cares though. You got shot in the head and then beat his butt. You're a effing warrior. Not meaning to minimize your side of this in any way, but how effing terrified would you be to shoot someone in the back of the head, and they respond by turning around to deck your crap? Serious. I had a guy high on both meth and acid break into my apartment in college. Somehow, he was convinced he lost his glasses inside. I'm doing dishes when my door gets slammed open. Next thing I know he is behind me and being choked to death in my kitchen. As I was losing consciousness, I grabbed my roommate's acrylic bong and frantically swung over my shoulder into his face. The bong broke but did nothing as the guy was choking me even harder. So I swung it again. Because the bong broke the first time, I was hitting the guy with a 6-inch claw of acrylic glass. Afterward, his scalp and part of his cheek were hanging off the side of his face. Essentially, I scalped him with a bong. So I chased the guy out of my house. There is easily 2 feet of snow outside. He tries walking back to his house through a cemetery as a shortcut. Seriously. And he passes out in the cemetery. The police only found him because I called the cops and they followed the blood and footprints through the snow. And that's the part I was surprised about the most. I hit the guy on his scalp. There isn't much blood in a scalp compared to most the body. But my kitchen was covered in blood. His blood was on my refrigerator, counter, floor and ceiling. It was almost as traumatic to clean it. My roommates were gone for winter break. Thank God my roommate's girlfriend came over and helped me. Now as for the guy. The cops couldn't charge him for 2 days because he needed blood transfusions. He was charged with assault, breaking and entering and an attempted murder. And he def had drugs on him too, not sure what he got convicted of but he went to jail for 4 years. I was around 20 to 21 years old and walking home at about 3 a.m. after a night out, and I was absolutely plastered from drinking so much. I was about 200 meters from my house when a hooded figure jumped out from behind a bush, and immediately had a knife pushing into my stomach as he grabbed my neck and tried pulling me in. Fortunately, I was stronger and pulled away. He went to lunge at me with the knife when suddenly he stopped, stared for what felt like an eternity but was probably a second or two and then said, "Holy crap, raise your spoon for war, I haven't seen you in so long, my bad mate." And then walked off like nothing had happened. I still don't know who he was to this day. And this is why you always treat others with kindness and respect. Never know when an old acquaintance might try to stab you for an unknown reason. Chilling with the brothers drinking at a park. As we drive off to leave, a car coming our way almost hits us. Driver obviously reacts like WTF and I guess the other car noticed. They turned around and caught up to us at a stop sign. Other driver asked if we had a problem, we told them stop driving like a-holes. Then their back window rolls down and 2 guys in the back draw Glocks with drum magazines. We just kind of froze up at first but then our driver pulled off hastily. Later found out those guys got arrested for shooting someone else that same day. Sophomore year of college, went with a friend to go hang out at his old college. We were supposed to crash with a few friends of his but we met a few ladies and ended up at a pool party. Next day went home and my friend started getting calls from one of his buddies' moms asking if he'd seen him. Turns out in the middle of the night a few guys broke into the house, kidnapped my friend's buddy and roommate. Took their car and drove them out to the middle of nowhere and executed them. I guess it was part of some gang initiation. I was supposed to sleep there with my friend. I still sometimes think about it and get the shivers. So, I did not know it was a murder attempt at the time, but looking back now, it was a definite possibility. In middle and high school my next-door neighbors were a boy, 1 year younger than me, John, and his younger brother who was 4 years younger than him, Nathan. My own younger brother and I had a similar age gap, and we found ourselves around each other all the time. Now I am a female and the rest of the group was all males, so there were just naturally times when the 3 of them would hang and I wouldn't be around. One day my little brother, who was around 9 at the time, comes home with a porno mag and is telling me about the porn videos they were watching as a little unit. Now guys, I have no idea if this is something that is done in your pre/adolescent circles, but it freaked me the hell out and I told my mom. My mom then went and told their single dad. What I didn't know was, their dad was an abusive piece of crap who beat both of those boys so badly that they couldn't go to school for weeks. No, we didn't call the police. We just filed it away and knew from that point forward to never tattle. I still carry the guilt of telling on John and Nathan with me to this day, because it set off a chain of events I would have never anticipated. As we got older, the brothers started acting out more and more. Bullying other kids, vandalism, weird stuff like toying with roadkill. As the level-headed female in the group, I opposed all of these things, and a faction emerged with me and the other neighborhood kids on one side, and John and Nathan on the other, just messing around and causing trouble. One day I had done something to piss off John, and he came at me with a large chef's knife. I didn't have shoes on, so I took off running through the backyard and crossed into the neighbors. John was hot on my tail, trailing me by maybe 4 feet when I fell down. There was some sort of exposed PVC drainage pipe that had been shattered at the top that I didn't see it and ran over. My foot was sliced open immediately and I went down screaming. I think it shocked him, my screaming, the sudden change of pace, and the blood. He stopped, laughed at me, then ran home, presumably so he didn't get his whipped. After I took care of myself, I told my mom what happened with the knife. She had started dating someone new, and I think this was the sort of feather that broke the camel's back. We moved to another part of town in the same district, about a 10-minute drive from our old house. Around that exact time we moved in, a new family moved into the house on the other side of John and Nate. Things continued down a bad path for those boys. Over the next year they got in trouble with school, and would randomly show up at our new house locked out of their own. The year I went off to college, I received a panicked phone call from my mom telling me to look up the local newspaper. John had murdered the girl who had moved into the other house next door to him. It was really grisly too. He chopped her up and stuffed her into a trunk that sat outside in his dad's car all day while a family picnic was happening. He and his little brother got caught trying to throw the trunk into the river from a bridge at night by a cop who happened to be driving by. I just thought to myself, that could have been me. Both brothers have been locked up for what has to be about 10 years at this point. They were both tried and convicted as adults. Everyone in our town just wants to see them burn in hell, but honestly the only thing I can think about is how it might have been different if our family reported the abuse from the onset. Maybe their little minds wouldn't have warped from a tender age. About 10 years ago I used to share a 3-bedroom apartment with a friend, so we had a spare room. At some point he told me he had met some nice guy, who was older and a philosophy book translator, and he was looking for a place. I thought the extra money would be nice, so I was okay with it. So the guy moves in. He's very reclusive, so we don't talk much, but I start to get a weird vibe from him. One day I had to go to work meeting about 3 hours earlier than normal, so I woke up, dressed and left. He and my other friend had already left, so the apartment was left unattended. The meeting was over sooner than I anticipated, so I decided I would have lunch at home. When I arrive at the building, there's a fire truck in the streets, and the doorman runs towards me as soon as he sees me, telling that there was a gas leak in my apartment and then they had to cut the gas to the whole building, and they were about to break into the apartment to check. When I enter the apartment I immediately smell the gas, and when I go check the kitchen I see all the stove's valves open. I called my friend and told him what happened. He called the other guy and he didn't answer. I went to check his bedroom and it was empty. The guy just left with all his stuff and tried to asphyxiate me while I slept. I didn't pursue it, and we never heard of the guy again.